evening, boils and ghouls. Yes, it is me, your old pal, the Collector. And welcome to another Friday Night Fable Fright. It's time to reveal the winning story of our latest round of Choose the Chapter that I posted on Instagram at Old Pal Collector. But first, the book. And I must say thank you because the chapter you chose is from the latest book in my collection, Tales from the Crypt, Volume 1. Hosted by your old pal the Cryptkeeper, with story adaptations by Eleanor Fremont, and was copyrighted in 1991 and published by Random House. The story you've all chosen first appeared in issue number 23 of the original comic book series in 1951. Now, I think I've dragged this out long enough, and so let's turn out the lights, light some candles, and enjoy Seance. Shall we begin? Walton Farnham was an ordinary man, an accountant for the firm of Bitsby and Company. His boss was Mr. Alan Bitsby, a large, loud, wealthy man who liked to get his way. One night, Mr. Bitsby and his wife Martha were gracing the home of the Farnhams with their presence for dinner. Mr. Bitsby enjoyed having dinner at the homes of his employees from time to time. He liked to say that it promoted a cozy family feeling in his company, but the truth was, he liked to make them squirm. He knew how nerve-wracking a visit from the boss was for them. On this particular occasion, Walton Farnham was squirming quite a bit. His house was spotlessly clean. The dinner casserole was bubbling in the oven, fresh flowers were on the table, and the Bitsbys were seated comfortably on the sofa. But Walton's wife was not home. She should have been home an hour ago, and Walton was running out of topics for small talk. I have to apologize for my wife, A.B., he stammered at last, looking at the floor. She's never this late. Quite all right, Walton, said Bitsby in his booming voice. Quite all right. Silence descended over the room. Walton was very distressed. Finally, he took a deep breath and looked Bitsby in the eye. Might as well take the plunge, as long as there was nothing else to talk about. Mr. Bitsby, Walton began nervously, I find that I am forced to ask you for a raise in salary. There have been some extra expenses lately, and he broke off. This was absolutely excruciating for him, and he couldn't go on. Mr. Bitsby puffed on his cigar and smiled. Let's not talk about business tonight, Walton, he said. Drop by in the morning. I'll see what I can do for you. He gave Walton a large wink. Suddenly, Walton was beside himself with joy. He would get a raise. They'd be able to pay all their bills after all. Just then, the sound of the key in the front door announced the arrival of Harriet Farnham. At last, in she sailed, looking flushed and hurried. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Bitsby, she said, extending her hand as she rushed in. I'm so sorry I'm late, but the seance took so long today. Bitsby sprang to his feet. His face was red. Seance, he cried. What seance? Is this what you mean by extra expenses, Farnham? Sending your wife to seances? Walton just shrugged. She wants to go, Mr. Bitsby, he explained. And if it makes her happy, bah! Idiotic nonsense. Those mediums are fakes, sitting a bunch of people around a table and pretending to contact their dead relatives. Poppycock. They're thieves. They prey on lonesome old people and take advantage of their losses. Bitsby turned to Harriet Farnham. Who does he produce for you, Mrs. Farnham? Your mother? No, she said shakily. My poor departed brother Maxim. And today I heard his voice. Harriet Farnham sat down beside her husband. He took her hand. Tell us what happened, Harriet, he said. Yes, Martha Bitsby chimed in. I'm so interested. Aren't you, Alan? Never mind, Martha, her husband grumbled. The trickery is not for you. You're a rich man's wife. A medium would milk you dry. They love to keep rich people coming back time after time while they try to reach their dearly departed. The richer you are, the longer it takes. Martha ignored her husband. Oh, go on, and tell us about it, dear, she said to Harriet. "Well," Harriet began, "I arrived at the medium's house about 10 after 3. The seance was scheduled to begin at 1/4 after. The others were ahead of me. There were quite a few of them waiting, some that I'd seen before and some I hadn't. First I met Mrs. Dober. She told me that Dr. Podos was communicating with her son, who died in the war. She said that her son was happy now, and Mrs. Dober looked so happy herself, just knowing that her son was at peace. I'm so glad, I told her. I've come to hear my brother Maxim. Last week he knocked but did not speak. Then Mr. Hatch spoke. I'd seen him the week before. Yes, I remember, he said. It was too bad. The doctor worked so hard. But did you hear my wife, Sarah? How near she was? Yes, I said. Her voice was strong. The doctor says he's going to try to make my son materialize today, Mrs. Dober told me. At that point, Alan Bitsby gave a loud snort of disbelief. His wife, who had been listening intently, shushed him. Go on, she urged. Harriet took a deep breath. Suddenly, he was in the room. The medium, she said. No one saw him come in. His deep, dark, piercing eyes looked from one of us to the other. Ah, he said to me. I'm so glad you've come again today, Mrs. Farnham. Perhaps this afternoon your brother Maxim will speak to us. I hope so, Doctor, I replied. Then we all sat around the table, and Dr. Podos turned out the lights. We joined hands and waited for the seance to begin. Mr. Hatch was on my left and Mrs. Dober on my right. The doctor was directly across from me, and I could see his face in the glow of the candle he had lit. He told everyone to be quiet and concentrate, and said he was about to go into his trance. I watched his face. He stared into the candle, muttering words none of us could understand. Perspiration broke out on his forehead, and he writhed as though he were in pain. And then suddenly, there was a voice. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, just that it was a woman's voice, and that it seemed to be floating somewhere above our heads. Harvey, it said. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Sarah, cried Mr. Hatch, is that you? Yes, Harvey, the voice said. Her voice was so sad. It was almost a wail. Why do you keep sending for me, Harvey, it moaned. I need you, Sarah, cried Mr. Hatch. I need you so. The medium twisted in what seemed like agony. Then the voice spoke again. You must forget me, Harvey, it said. My life is finished. Yours is not. You must accept life without me. I'm going now. Her voice was fading away. Mr. Hatch begged her frantically to come back, but she was gone. I looked over at the doctor, but he was still in his stupor. And then it came. That sharp, clear rapping. And then another voice. Harriet Farnham covered her face with her hands and began to weep. They all watched her for a moment, her husband looking concerned, Martha filled with morbid curiosity, and Alan Bitsby looking disgusted. Finally, Martha could hold out no longer. She put a hand on Harriet's shoulder and urged her gently to continue. It will be good to talk about it, my dear, she said. Harriet collected herself. It was him, she said. It was his voice. Maxim, I said. Is that you? Speak to me, please, Maxim. I listened. I strained my ears, but I heard nothing. Then a voice came from far away. Harriet, it said. Can you hear me? Oh, yes, Maxim. I can hear you, I said. I can't stay long, Harriet, he said to me. It was his voice. I know it was. It's so hard, he said. Maybe. Next time. And then he faded away. Just like that. Wait, I cried. There's so much I want to ask you. But he was gone. Dr. Podos couldn't hold him. Well, Harriet went on, at least I'd heard my brother's voice. I was happy. But Dr. Podos wasn't finished yet. His eyes were still glassy, and he was still in his trance. Suddenly he gripped the arms of his chair very tightly, and we heard another voice. Mother, it said. It sounded very fragile, very young. Mrs. Dober's face lit up. It was her son, Paul, the one that died in the war. Paul, she cried, is that you? I'm here, Paul. The voice sounded very unhappy and worried. I told you last time, Mother, it said. I'm happy now. Why did you come back? I just wanted to see you, Paul, said his mother. The doctor said he'd try. Then she turned to the doctor and begged him to let her see her son. And all the time the voice was protesting, saying, "No, no, please." Harriet stopped and took a drink of water. She was shaking. Then, slowly, she continued, a mist rose in the darkness of the room. It began to take shape. It was a man in uniform. "Paul," said Mrs. Dober, "I'm beginning to see you." "Don't look, Mother, don't," the ghost pleaded. But it was too late. She'd seen him. We'd all seen him. His face, it was half shot away. It was awful. Awful, Harriet sobbed as she finished her story. "I told you not to try to see me, Mother," the ghost was moaning, and his mother was crying, "Paul, my Paul, you're hurt." And then he was gone, and the seance was over. Harriet sat there staring at the wall. "Oh," Martha Bitsby shivered. "It gives me the creeps. Doesn't it you, Alan?" "Fake," he thundered. "Nothing but a fake. That's what he is." He turned on Walton. "You'll get no raise from me, Farnham, if you insist upon letting your wife spend good money on that trash." Weakly, Walton tried to defend his wife. "But she heard his voice, Mr. Bitsby," he protested. "Maxim's voice." "If I prove he's a fake, Farnham, will you forbid your wife to see him again?" "How can you expose him, Mr. Bitsby?" asked Walton. "Simple. Martha, my wife, will stay here. We three will go to your medium and ask to speak to my dear departed wife, Martha. When he produces her spirit, you'll know he's a faker." "That sounds fair enough to me," agreed Walton. And so Harriet called Dr. Podos and made an appointment for herself and her husband and his friend, Mr. Bitsby. "He's trying to contact his wife," explained Harriet. "All right, bring him in tonight," said the doctor. Not long after, the three of them left for his house, while Mrs. Bitsby stayed behind. When they arrived there, they were ushered into the seance room, which was hung with heavy red velvet curtains. There was a red carpet on the floor and a large chandelier overhead, which tinkled with the slightest movement of the air. Since the doctor had arranged to see them at an unusual time, he was waiting for them alone. No other people were present. "Ah," he said to Mrs. Farnham, rubbing his hands together. "So these are the people you brought?" "Yes," she said timidly, hating the idea of trying to fool the doctor. "This is my husband, and this is Mr. Bitsby, our friend. He's a widower. He would like to communicate with his dear departed wife, Martha." She looked at the floor. "Won't you sit down?" invited the doctor. The lights were lowered. Mr. Bitsby winked broadly at Farnham as they took seats around the big round table. A single red candle flickered at the center. Dr. Podos closed his eyes. He was really a very ordinary-looking man, with a moustache and thinning hair. But in a minute, he wasn't looking very ordinary at all. As he entered his hypnotic trance, his face began to twitch, and his eyelids fluttered, showing the whites of his rolled-up eyes. Bitsby leaned over to Walton. "Seems to be having a bit of trouble, eh, Farnham?" he whispered loudly, nudging his employee in the ribs. "Shh!" scolded Harriet. Now, the medium began writhing as though he were in terrific pain. His face was bathed in sweat, and the veins in his forehead stood out. "Can't seem," he gasped, "can't seem to rouse spirit." Bitsby elbowed Farnham again. "Pretty good act, isn't it?" he whispered. "Yes," said Walton uncertainly. "It is." "Wait," Harriet interrupted. "Listen." The three of them sat up as the sound of a very faint voice became audible. It said, as though from very far away. They looked at Dr. Podos. He was deeply into his trance and did not see them. The voice said, a bit stronger now, "You call me?" "Mrs. Bitsby!" cried Walton. "It's her voice!" "Martha!" said Bitsby. Suddenly, Alan Bitsby jumped up, red-faced in anger. "You see? What did I tell you? He's a fake! This proves it!" Dr. Podos emerged from his trance, looking confused and exhausted. What happened?" he asked. "I don't understand. I seemed to feel a spirit that was very close." very new. Did someone come? Bah, said Bitsby, marching for the door. Let's go, he said to his two companions. I've proven my point. I guess you have, said Walton. Then he and Harriet went home with the triumphant Alan Bitsby. Ha ha ha, he gloated on the way. See, they're all fakes, all of them. Convinced now, Farnham? Yes, said Walton slowly, as they reached the front door of the house and Harriet unlocked it. I'm afraid But he was interrupted by a loud, horrified gasp from Harriet. Look, she screamed. They rushed into the house. There, lying in a grotesque heap on the living room floor, was Martha Bitsby. Her eyes stared unseeing ahead of her. She was quite dead. Martha, shouted Bitsby. Oh my God, she's dead! Then the medium wasn't a fake, said Walton Farnham in a shaking voice. She really was trying to contact you. Harriet buried her face in her hands. Oh, what have we done? She sobbed. What have we done? Well, my dear Harriet, you played games with forces you didn't understand, and ultimately had your husband's boss's wife killed in the process. That's about it, really. I guess the only raise the Farnhams got was raising the dead. And now, let me be the voice of reason for you all, my dear Fright followers. Let sleeping spirits lie. You don't know who's on the other side of that door, just waiting to come in. Got it? Good. And now, thanks so much for all of you who played Choose the Chapter. Don't forget to head on over to Instagram and follow me at Old Pal Collector for your next chance to take part in my Friday night Fable Frights. And now, until we shriek again, good night out there, whatever you are.